Today, perhaps more than ever, we're all being observed and tracked. For social scientists, this presents an amazing amount of data to use. The systematic observation of visitors can produce fairly interesting results without imposing on the visitor's experience. So we will begin our discussion of research methods with the least obtrusive method, observation. In this brief video presentation, I'll highlight observation and its benefits, provide a few examples, and preview two guest presentations by Dr. Greg Lindsay and Brian Peterson. Now, your first question about observation might be, when should I do it? Observation is extremely useful in the initial phase of a research project. It can serve as an aid to better understand an issue or opportunity. For example, if you're interested in visitor conflict at your site, you might observe the number, type of interactions visitors have with each other. Or if you want to observe off-trail incidents, you can observe trails and see how many people go off-trail and where. Perhaps you're interested in visitor behavior in general, such as where and how someone uses an interpretive display. You could observe how the visitors are using the space and what part of the exhibit visitors are attending to. So observation is obviously useful if the topic allows it. You can observe attitudes, but you can observe behavior. And because observing behavior takes a lot of time, you must have ample time on your hands. Finally, observation is a very good technique when you're interested in a sensitive topic such as litter. For example, if you ask people if they litter, the socially desirable response is no. However, if you observe a person for a long time, you may find examples of littering among them. Observation is also good to assess inappropriate or even illegal behaviors. For example, Dr. Joe Rogenbuck and colleagues observed people stealing from Petrified National Park and the impact of select methods that would minimize the theft, such as having a sign at the exit indicating cars would be checked prior to exiting. Similarly, one of your readings describes observation of people walking off trail and the impacts of various management techniques to reduce off-trail incidents. Sometimes observation is required or useful to justify a designation or management change too. For example, the Union Depot in St. Paul is required by the Federal Highway Administration to observe and count how many people use the facility. In another example, arguments for a recent designation of a national monument used estimates of how many new visitors and their economic activity to justify the designation. So, as you can see, there are several times and places where observation may be appropriate for data collection. One place you'll see observation commonly used is in museums and other visitor attractions. Observation can serve in the initial stage of exhibit and display design to see how visitors are responding to and interacting with exhibits. Based on the findings, you can adjust how the displays are presented or where key pieces of information are placed. For example, to understand how a math exhibit was used, Korn and Associates observed families at the Science Museum of Minnesota and systematically noted the family composition, group size, the adults engaging with the exhibit, and who initiated the exit within the groups. Adult interactions were viewed as positive contributors to the learning experience for children. In a more outdoor-related example, we've observed visitors on beaches to help National Park Service units understand the density, the reality of visitor concerns and their occurrence, and then do facility planning. At Pictured Rocks Beach, for example, a systematic observation revealed that although some visitors were really concerned about dogs off leash on the beach, it happened less than 10% of our observations. Also, again, although visitors complained about waiting in line for the bathrooms, lines occurred less than 5% of the time we observed. So these findings inform the Park Service about if and what educational and facility decisions they should make. And no, they didn't build more bathrooms. As your book discussed, there are two primary forms of observation, direct and indirect. More often in recreation and tourism, the indirect or unobtrusive observation is conducted, where the researcher is on the far right hand of this continuum. In these instances, you're a complete observer. For example, there have been experiments to observe if the amount of litter and littering behavior decreases with the type of a litter receptacle provided. Also, the presentation by Dr. Greg Lindsay shares automated indirect observation of trail use and its utility for planning and management. These instances, again, are found on the right-hand side of the continuum of complete observer. On the other end of the continuum, and perhaps the most intrusive form of observation, is when you're actually a participant in the topic or area of interest. For example, Dr. David Scott was interested in recreation specialization. So he chose to start playing bridge to understand the process of how people specialize and how they differ from others who are actually doing it and doing it himself. In between these areas is where you can observe as a participant, such as when Dr. Barry Garst went on an adventure trip and participated as a camp counselor to understand the camp's impact on youth. The participant opportunities provide the researcher an active role in the research process and allows them to learn with the respondents. The type of question you're interested in, as well as the resources available, will influence the type of observation you conduct. Regardless of the type of observation you do choose, an essential part is taking notes on what you see, hear, think, feel, and even smell. All of your senses can and should be used, as they're also impacting those you're observing. So 3 types of notes exist: descriptive, inferential, and evaluative. A descriptive example comes to us from Colorado, where observers watched visitors and how they interacted with their dog and if they picked up after their dog, in consideration for the Leave No Trace principle, a visitor education effort. These types of notes are descriptive. Now, in addition, the observers likely inferred that if they picked up after their dog, they understand and believe in the Leave No Trace principles. Finally, you can evaluate the observed behavior and suppose that if someone picks up after their dog, they believe in the principles of Leave No Trace, and that is good. Similarly, with the math exhibit example, the observers described the adult and child interaction, inferred children learn more the longer and more engaged the adult-child interaction was, and then evaluated it as better if the groups interacted. So, as you have probably determined and already read about, there are pros and cons to observation. Observation is beneficial because when indirect, it typically doesn't interfere with a visitor. It's unobtrusive and costs only the time of the researcher. Managers usually like observation because of this lack of intrusion on the visitor and their visit. However, the time it takes to do observation can be very intensive and of long duration. Even if you're lucky enough to have video logs of visitor behavior, you still have to review them. Also, on the challenging side, observation is limited to behavioral information only and might have a reactive effect. For example, if someone watching you, you may not litter. To make the most of observation, it's useful and preferred to have more than one observer to ensure the reliability of the results. Finally, to make your observation findings generalizable, you really should consider a multitude of settings, times, and observations. With all of this, observation is still a useful tool to understand visitor behavior. In your first practicum, you'll get a chance to perform some observation. Enjoy!